The Candyman can because he mixes it with blood and makes the world run red or something. I don't know.
Yes.
So we are here to talk about a movie that I'm overjoyed to discuss with you, Nia DaCosta's Candyman.
That doesn't sound very sincere.
Oh, it's I'm dripping with sincerity, like sweet, sweet honey.
The sweets to the sweet.
All right, let's start at the beginning. We were kind of messaging last night. David Fowley of Keeping It Real. I should actually get the introduction out of the way this time. Yeah. Yes. Long time no see. You have seen parts of the original Candyman from 1992?
I've now seen the first 49 minutes.
Did you stop because of time or because you gave up?
Time, responsibilities, priorities. I mean, I had all these years to watch the original, right? So what's my excuse?
Nothing like cramming for the test.
I know, right? And that's me. And I bought the Shot Factory, the nice, 2-disc Blu-ray, plug. And I guess initially I had thought that, I knew about the whole say Candyman 5 times and he shows up and kills you, groin to gullet, that kind of thing. I kind of when I was younger, I thought that was just about it. But I realized later on that there was a lot more to this movie, at least the original movie. I don't know about the 2 sequels. I don't know if it's even worth it. I think Tony Todd was in all of them, right?
I've only seen the original, and then this remake. Sequels, I might have even seen part of number 2, but they were, I think, direct to video, or they should have been.
Right.
I never really gave them much.
I just love the name "Farewell to the Flesh." I mean, that's awesome. But very Clive Barker-ish, and there you go.
Here's a little bit of trivia as to how my mind works. When I was in high school taking archery, the flesh is a part of an arrow. And so every time I would hear the word flesh, I would think farewell to the flesh.
Oh, there you go. That makes sense.
And sometimes when I was thinking about that Chevy Chase comedy from 1984, I was singing Candyman,
Farewell to the Flesh.
Farewell to the Flesh. I want to see Tony Todd and Chevy Chase go at it.
That would be good. Maybe the next Fletch movie they should call that. But anyway, so I knew that there was more to it than just a slasher flick, but I just never got around to it. And I'm watching again. I did say before that I had only seen parts of I think, was it Bernard Rose who directed it? Mm-hmm. Yeah. And now that I've seen the first 40 something minutes of it after this sequel, it's not necessarily a reboot or remake. That this is actually kind of more of it's what they've been doing lately with kind of like legacy sequels or whatever, where they're just trying to make a sequel, trying to make you forget. I mean, it's easy to forget Candyman 2 and 3 because nobody really knew about it, but they're saying this is a direct sequel, and it kind of is, to the original one. Having seen the first 40 minutes of the original for the first time after this sequel, it's very interesting to see some of the similarities. I think, especially in the way both films open, where the original Candyman is looking on the streets of Chicago from above. This movie opens up as if you're just kind of kind of like laying down in a wagon. You're just like in this kind of foggy, you're seeing some recognizable Chicago skyscrapers, buildings, if you will, even like the Lake Street L tracks. You're seeing they're familiar if you know about them, but from a totally different angle and at night and kind of in the fog. So it's very interesting to me. But that's from a kind of like a worm's eye view, where the original movie was more of a bird's eye view. It's kind of very interesting.
Yeah, and even leading up to that, like the studio, the production company logos, like Braun and then Monkey Paw, they're all backwards.
Yeah.
And we watched this on advanced screeners. We didn't go see this in the theater, so I was watching it and I was like, is there something wrong with my screener? Because I've seen all sorts of weird stuff with like watermarks and buffering and things. Like, did I finally get a backwards screener? No, it turned out it's
Oh,
just being cute and everything's backwards because we're turning it all upside down. And the
yeah.
movie opens with Sammy Davis Jr. singing the Candyman, and then it gets all warbly. I
I didn't
really
need that.
I didn't need this movie at all. The Bernard Rose original is not, a masterpiece, but it is a classic in its own right. And there's a reason that Tony Todd has become a horror icon for essentially, one film. I mean, I know
Yeah.
there were the other movies, but people don't talk about those films, as much as they do the original. And to see what, Nia DaCosta and Jordan Peele, and there was another writer on this new one that I don't
Yeah.
know, what they did by modernizing this and what they decided to focus on. I felt that the original film addressed the same kinds of issues and the same legacy of, terror in the Black community in a much subtler, much richer, and much more thoughtful way than this, kind of a BLM era, all cops are bastards, obvious, hammer over the head or hook through the heart movie did. It's preachy, it's unoriginal, and as far as being a sequel, they do their damn best to put a stamp on it. It's not just the Legend of Candyman, but they get so convoluted in the origin of Candyman because it's no longer just Tony Todd's character. It turns out it's a mantle. It's a
It's
lot
like,
of Black people who've
like,
been killed now can be Candyman.
right. It's
Uh,
like, yeah, it's like Black Widow or Black Panther. I mean, anybody could be it, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Even to the point where, and I understand they're trying to be cute about it and, subvert expectations or whatever, keep you on the edge of your seat. But the first Candyman that they show is a guy in a kind of a pimp jacket with a hook for a hand, and he's kind of menacing. It turns out he was, a victim of police brutality or whatever, but he was also another Candyman. So it's just a coincidence that he had this hook, whereas Tony Todd's character, his arm had been hacked off by a vigilante mob in the late 1800s, and they shoved this hook onto his arm as sort of an abomination. I'm like, really? Is that going to be like the common thread? Do they all have to have hooks? Is this going to be a weird coincidence? And the same kind of coat?
They have to have a jacket. They have to have a hook. I mean,
passing out literal candy, like
with
it's like
razor blades.
Yeah, but that turned out to be, a red herring that led to the this man's, death at the hands of the cops. It's like they've got all of these weird half-baked ideas and a very literal interpretation of the legend that it's, it's like they just threw everything at the wall and saw what stuck.
I think initially it is being set up as something very interesting, like maybe the first half. And I think the more we see Candyman, the character and this movie develop, it kind of just loses that in a way. It gets away from itself, and it just tries to either do too much or not do enough in a way, and it does get kind of, like you said, a little bit convoluted. I like the cast. I think that what this movie does as far as like visuals and the way it's filmed, the cinematography, I think is really good. Not just the the opening tracking of the geography of the Chicago. I just like the way some of these shots are framed and the production design, like in that art gallery and everything. I just thought some of those things were really cool. I think some people are going to be a little disappointed if they're genre fans hoping to get like jump scares and a whole lot of crazy bloodiness. That's not really what's here. Yeah, and I didn't mind that at all. I like this idea of this kind of possessed artist, kind of, really diving into something with passion and going nuts on it. And we've seen that so many times before, especially in a horror genre, of like artists, either being possessed by something or possessed in their work, and or let's say obsessed with their work and canceling out everything else, which leads them into either being susceptible to something, or being led by some kind of evil spirit or demon. I guess I would have liked to have known. So this character, the one of the main characters is Anthony McCoy, and in the original movie, he is in the original movie. Doesn't really have any lines, but
we'll just go full spoilers here, so don't worry about holding back.
So he was a baby, and so that was very interesting to see, and to see that, he, as the movie developed, he didn't really even know his origin story, and so it was really interesting to see that kind of play out. Like, and I wish they would have delved into that a little bit more, of like, here's this character who didn't even know about his past, but it all seemed kind of very kind of small world and coincidental that he would be, even though he didn't know it, he has these ties to Candyman even before he began this kind of like artistic investigation into the Candyman mythology of, the neighborhood in Cabrini Green. But it just seemed kind of like too coincidental that he would find this kind of like, spooky laundromat guy, William Burke, played by Coleman Domingo. And I like the way initially that character was portrayed, and who that character was. I think it gets a little bit too, goofy is not the word, but like kind of just, a little bit too maybe heavy-handed as far as where those characters go, especially the laundromat guy.
Goofy and heavy-handed, I think, are absolutely fair. Now, I'm going to, for the sake of the show, I think we need to talk about some stuff that you perhaps might not know yet because you haven't finished the original Candyman. So
Okay.
I'm sorry, I'm going to walk you through some spoilery stuff because it's going to help,
right.
I think, make a point about the sequel. They do mention Helen, the original, the protagonist from the 92 film, played, I think, wonderfully by Virginia Madsen.
Yeah.
She was, a University of Chicago grad student who was doing a paper on urban legends, and she got pulled down into the myth of Candyman, much like Anthony does, but in a different way. He's more of an artistic exploration, where she was more of an academic one. So It's kind of cool to see those parallels. But at the end of Candyman, the 92 version, she saves baby Anthony and ostensibly kills Candyman. Now, by sacrificing herself in order to save this baby, and we see a little bit about that, and they have these shadow puppet paper cutouts for the flashback scenes that pop up throughout the remake. Yeah. I liked it initially, but it just, I don't know. They didn't do, once you see it in basically the first shot of the film, where it's, I think it's young William, before he goes down to the laundry room, he's doing it and he's reenacting, police brutality, which, that happened in 1977. I mean, not saying it didn't happen. I'm just saying, I don't, it just seemed like a very 2019 thing to put on a movie that's starting out in 77. It's hard for me to articulate. But we see that throughout the rest of the movie, but it doesn't get inventive or innovative. They might as well just be showing a flashback with people because oh, here comes the paper cutouts again. It's a creative idea, but once you see it through 5 different flashbacks, you're like, I understand what you're doing. It's cute. But so Helen dies at the end of Candyman, and so does Candyman, we think. her husband, who had been cheating on her and kind of like not supporting her as she was going insane.
Xander Berkeley.
Yes. Yeah. Yes. 24 is Xander Berkeley. At the end, he goes into the bathroom. He's got his new, like, I think he was a professor at the school, and he's got this hot young, student or whatever that he's been, sleeping around with. He goes into the bathroom and he's completely distraught over the death of his wife. And he just like buries his head in his hands and he just says, Helen,
CANDYMAN.
Helen. No, he
No.
says his
Helen.
says Helen's wife, his wife's name, like over and over, just kind of like sobbing in grief. And then she shows up in the mirror and she's like this ghostly white apparition. And she says, "What's the matter, Trevor? Scared of something?" And then, hooks the hell out of him. And so the idea is that this legend, is sort of moved on to this different form. Awesome idea. But if you're going to make a sequel to this called Candyman, you kind of have to deal with that. And at first I thought they were going to, because they mention Helen. They mention that from the outside world's perspective, she was this grad student who went insane and started murdering people,
Right.
under the guise of investigating this urban legend. But the fact of her urban legend never kind of made it out. So not only is this movie kind of ignoring the sequels, it's also sort of ignoring the way that it ended itself in the first movie, because there's people are still talking about Candyman, even though, because she defeated him, the rules of this whole franchise are all over the place. Because if she killed Candyman back in 92, why is this still an urban legend if he hasn't shown up for 30 years?
Hence the mantle. Yeah.
Right.
Passed on.
But that was never a conceit from the 92 version, which you would have thought would have been brought up, because they only mentioned the Tony Todd character. And this guy, the old man Sherman or whatever his name was, he was beaten to death by the cops in 77. So you would have thought that would have been part of the, scooped up as part of the legend.
Sure.
Now, I want to talk about this briefly. This scene, the heavy-handed is exactly the right word. Hilarious, I think, is another, because I'm sorry, I know they were
at church.
No, the scene in the laundromat, when the little boy cries out that there's a scary man with the hook, that turns out he's a fugitive from the law because he's been accused of putting razors in the candy that this little white girl, she died out of the hospital. So there's an APB out on him. This little kid screams in the laundromat because he sees the guy with the hook. A clown car's worth of cops bust through that door and they're going down the stairs. I understand that the filmmakers are trying to like make a point or something, but what?
That wasn't the laundromat. That was the actual that was the project.
Right, but he was down in the laundry room. He was going into the laundry room.
I know, but
yeah, sorry, the laundry room. Yes.
Yeah.
So the kid is like, he's in the laundry room of his apartment complex. There's a giant hole in the wall, which is visual iconography from the first Candyman, but doesn't really make sense here, because I understand it's a rundown project, but still it looks like a really nice laundry room with just this random hole in the wall that this guy is living in or something. I don't know. We never really go back there. But then he runs up the stairs and all of a sudden these cops break through the door, and there's like the whole Gotham City PD at the end of The Dark Knight Rises going down into the sewers was more realistic than the amount of cops they have going into the laundry room, going downstairs and apparently beating this guy to death.
It didn't make much sense, because he did cry out, but for a while it looked like the cops, like the boy heard the cops come in, but for a while it looked like the cops were going somewhere else. And I think that would have been more interesting. If maybe they, apprehended somebody in an apartment there in the complex, and just the boy maybe just, cut to the boy just kind of seeing this bee, kind of buzz around him, and then 2019, but yeah, it did seem a little like what called them down into the laundry room. The cops. I don't know.
I would have even been fine if it had just been the two beat cops that, were first responding to the call. They go down there and they, beat this guy to death or whatever. It's just that, when you're trying to make a statement about police brutality, for popular entertainment, if you're making it for a wide audience, I understand if you're making it for a very specific audience who are like, all cops are bastards and, isn't it terrible what's being done, every day and all that stuff. You can kind of go big with that. But when you're trying to reach, I think, a broader audience and make, possibly make them receptive to the ideas you're putting forward, you can't go as broad as like, yeah, there were 30 cops beating this 70-year-old man with a hook hand to death in the basement because he was suspected of, killing this little girl. And they never actually resolved that issue.
No.
They, I guess they said, and, weeks later, it turns out there was more candy with razors showing up. I got news for you. That urban legend / true story from back in the 70s about like everything from poison aspirin to apples and razors, that was happening everywhere. So it's not proof that that guy didn't kill that girl.
Right. Yeah. And then fast forward to 2019, where there's, more, established or heavier social commentary about gentrification, about what has happened to, Cabrini Green over the years. Again, there's similarities there from the previous movie. I get it. I think that this is, a lot more emphasized in this sequel, just because the focus is on this artist looking at the neighborhood and what it's been done, and not necessarily say a student working on their thesis about urban legends. They both arrive at Candyman in different ways.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, the writers here are changing the lore of Candyman a little bit, and kind of moving that around. There is that kind of, I think his name's Sherman Fields that is mentioned. It almost gets somewhat like by convoluted, I kind of mean confusing. Just because like what is, so who was Candyman and who is Candyman, and can anybody be Candyman? Because what happens in the church with the deranged laundromat guy and our protagonist, played by the Black Mantis dude, is it Yahya Abdul-Mateen II?
Yes.
I just don't feel like that transition that this Anthony McCoy character goes through is fully explored. That it just seems like he goes from like 1 to 6, in a matter of a couple scenes.
Yeah, you definitely start. It's very much like Brundlefly,
Mm-hmm.
down to the point where, early on in the movie, when he starts going to Cabrini Green and taking pictures of like, some of the buildings that are left there that haven't been completely gentrified, he gets stung by a bee and there's a welt on his hand. And then throughout the course of the film, his entire like arm and then his like half of his body starts transforming into this grotesque thing. And at one point he pulls off a fingernail, because we've seen that a million times. But then, yeah, you're right. There's this church scene where William, who was the boy who had the laundromat encounter early on, we're led to believe became an acolyte of the original, of a Candyman.
Mm-mm.
And was trying to, I guess, recruit Anthony or help him along in this ritual that was going to help him ascend to become Candyman, because back in the 90s, when Helen saved him, he was also interrupting a ritual where Candyman was going to enter his body. I don't remember any of that being a thing or how that was supposed to have worked, but they don't do a very good job of helping us understand what the stakes are, what's happening, in this church at the end of this movie at all. And I don't think that's important. I think what they're trying to do is just get to that, penultimate climactic scene where Teyana Parris, playing Brianna, who is Anthony's girlfriend,
art curator.
Right. Yeah. They have an encounter. He pretty much collapses in her arms, and then sort of recreating that laundry room scene, the cops bust in and just immediately, again, it's a statement. I get it. It's a statement movie, but it's a clumsy statement, because even I am having a hard time understanding what the hell happened. the cops bust into a room. They've been called because there's a maniac with a hook hand or a knife or something running around like terrorizing people. They hear a woman screaming, I think. They bust into a room. They see the woman on the ground with a person lying in her arms, and their first thought is to open fire on the person who's lying in her arms. I can understand if they bust in like 3 minutes beforehand where they're both standing upright and they see this guy with a hook hand and an unarmed woman and they, blow him away. I think that's more effective for whatever it is they're trying to say with this commentary, because later on they get to her being in the back seat of this car, and you've got
that was weird.
Go ahead. It's not weird. It's gross, because this whole movie, the theme of this movie essentially is all cops are bastards and all cops are white, apparently, because you've got the guy getting into the front of this police truck.
Who's
and he's like
kind of like a detective, maybe,
I guess, but he gets in, he's like, here's how it's gonna go down, and he like tells her essentially what her testimony is going to be. The cops broke in and your boyfriend was armed, or he raised his hook or something, and the cops had no choice but to defend themselves, or you're an accomplice to all these horrible things that have been going on, I guess, and you're going to go up the river forever. And so what she decided to do, she decides to summon CANDYMAN so he can kill all the white cops.
Which is really weird, because then it just almost feels like she's all of a sudden becomes his controller, or what, they're working in cahoots. I mean, yes, all the carnage happens outside of a vehicle that she's in the back seat of, but at one point he comes right up to her window and he doesn't do anything. So it's like the fact that they were together when he was normal, and he's calling on her, or she's calling on him now that they're cool, or what?
It kind of gets to an issue from the original CANDYMAN, which is, okay, let's look at the lore. The lore is you say CANDYMAN's name 5 times in the mirror, he shows up and he kills you.
Yeah.
Right. Except when he doesn't, because CANDYMAN in the original seduces Helen and kind of it guides her down this, she gets curious and she falls down this trap of like kind of getting in bed with the devil. She starts going crazy. All of a sudden she's waking up at crime scenes, having like cut off a dog's head and all this weird stuff. And she ends up kind of snapping out of it to sacrifice herself and kill CANDYMAN. I don't know if that's what is going to happen with Brianna, but the rules of this whole thing are never fleshed out. Even in the original, it's not fleshed out, but you can kind of understand it, because it's like, well, maybe CANDYMAN took a liking to Helen, maybe he's using her. But if you're going to take that nugget and expand it into another story involving different characters, you have to lay down what the hell is going on.
Yeah, and even that whole scene, like at the end when she gets out of the cop car, she starts walking around kind of like in a daze, and then behind a fence, she sees him taking out another guy. I guess it's a cop.
It's the cop. It's the guy who
was the driver guy.
Yeah, because he got out and fled.
That's right. And then he starts levitating, and there's bees floating, and then you see Tony Todd's head.
A young like, de-aged Tony Todd.
Yeah. So it's like, okay, look, I don't need everything explained to me, but how does this work? And it just, I don't know. It doesn't make sense. Again, I liked a lot of how everything looks in this movie, and I like, how I like a lot of the acting. I think one of my favorite scenes is that one where as Anthony Yahya goes to the weird thing is he goes to the critic's apartment, an art critic's apartment. I don't know why that is even in here, but there's that scene in the hallway where he actually sees kind of like himself becoming CANDYMAN, because his reflection is CANDYMAN, and he just gets really freaked out. That feels very real, like it's a real reaction, like that you would be as freaked out. That's kind of cool. I like that. But then just there's this whole thing on almost a commentary on art criticism too, and
well,
man, it's a wormhole of like how critics are handled in movies in general, I think.
And I think they kind of take the easy way out because, and this movie does too. I think there's a nugget of a really strong film with actual well thought out commentary, not only in terms of, social justice issues, but also in terms of art and art appropriation and also gentrification, because the movie makes the counter argument very subtly for a lot of the points that its protagonists are raising and kind of railing against. In terms of gentrification, early on in Brianna and Anthony's, apartment or whatever, that's in Cabrini Green, which is now, complete, it's very well to do, and it's a nice kind of high rise thing. Her brother, I guess, and her brother's boyfriend are all hanging out, and they're talking about, gentrification. And he makes a comment because one of them is going off on like, the white man, built the projects, and then they tore down the projects. They realized they built the projects, and we were ghettoized, and then scattered and all this stuff. And now they've brought in all these white people to live in a place that was formerly ours, and it's being completely appropriated. And then the brother says something like, yeah, you guys are living here too.
Right.
And so that's a nice little, counterpoint, but it's kind of dropped there in the art gallery scene when Anthony is, and I wrote this down, forgive me, I'm going to try and find this quote.
When he's talking to the critic, you mean?
Yes, because he's got a piece in this art gallery. The art gallery owner's name is Clive. That's a nice little touching tribute, I guess, to Clive Barker. Also, I don't know if you noticed this, but in the laundromat scene, not the laundry room scene, but the laundromat, when William is being approached by Anthony, it's a real quick shot. You see him reading a book, and he kind of sets it down. He stands upright. The book is Weave World by Clive Barker.
Okay.
But in the art gallery scene, Anthony goes up to the art critic, and he's kind of like stalking her because she's looking at the piece, and I understand when I say stalking, I mean, I don't mean like, in a negative way. It's just hovering. He's like, kind of trying to figure out, what does she think of the piece? Can I answer any questions? But it's just a mirror on a blank wall. And you're supposed to say the name Candyman 5 times. That's the gimmick of the piece. But if you actually open it up, there's stuff behind there, which sort of recalls the imagery from the first movie. But he says, I'm trying to calibrate tragedy into a focused lineage that culminates in the now. And she immediately calls bullshit on it, saying, this whole trend of appropriating, Black tragedy in the past to create art in the present is kind of played out. And I was like, yeah, it is.
I mean, she's not wrong.
She's not.
And that's what you get when you explain your art. When you're explaining your artwork, you're hovering around a critic and explaining your artwork. That's a no-no.
But that's like even earlier than that, the art, the dealer, the gallery owner, when he's looking at Anthony's paintings, it's all like pictures of like black bodies and nooses and stuff. And he's like, yeah, this stuff was cool like 2 years ago, but I'm planning a show for, the future. What do you got? And I think that would have been a really cool idea to explore. We get hints of it because his artwork does get better throughout the movie as he gets more obsessive. He goes into these crazy giant canvases splattered with oil and acrylics,
bizarre portraits.
Right. And some of them are Tony Todd, and some of them I think are that Sherman guy, and some of them are more abstract, but you can kind of tell the faces almost as if they're impressions of what we would see with those bee swarms kind of obscuring the identity of Candyman. I would love to have seen that idea explored more. You've got to get past the superficiality and the pop culture kind of understanding of history to get into, a real understanding of what has come before. But they don't do any of that. They just kind of drop it. But yeah, the art critic stuff, the only thing I really dug about that was her demise, because as she sees Anthony out of the apartment, the camera pulls back from outside the apartment, and we see her being attacked by the invisible Candyman killer. And it's very, if you're not paying attention, you might just think, oh, this is a really boring, like pan out shot of this building. Why am I watching this? But you can see this tiny figure being assaulted and levitated and slashed.
Yeah, it's almost like the you see the tiny figure, the victim, but also the Candyman's kind of like this shadowy tiny figure, which is really interesting.
Yeah.
I although I think Tony Todd's performance is for the ages, and it made his career. I really kind of like initially, at least for the first half, how they're introducing Candyman. It's almost like kind of like a, showing the shark in Jaws. It's like very much less is more, and even the perspectives, like when those kind of like 4 or 5 ditzy teenage girls in the bathroom all stand in front of the mirror, and they're all white, and there's this one.
No, there's one Asian girl.
Oh, okay, there's one Asian girl, and but you have the black girl sitting in the toilet, clueless because she's got her headphones on, she can't hear anything. She's the one who's just kind of witnessing, and I although it seemed a little like on the nose, but I did like the way
on the nose. She had a BLM patch on her backpack.
I did like the way that scene was filmed, because you're kind of looking at it initially from the girl's perspective, and then this one girl's perspective, it shifts, and you can only see so much when you're sitting on a toilet in a stall, a bathroom stall, and one of the girls is compact mirrors drop, and you see some of like what's happening. So I thought that was a very interesting way of seeing, not showing a bloodbath, but just showing like what little we know what's happening because of what we're hearing and what we're kind of expecting.
I think this might have been a scene that was ruined for me in the trailer, or a shot, because we see that compact and you see his Candyman's feet kind of floating into frame, which is a cool, creepy image. I just, just a couple of things bothered me about this scene. Again, and I guess thematically it works because at one point it's intimated that Candyman is sort of an avenger for the Black community. They want to use him to kind of get back at white people for, all the sins of the past. Fine. I think just make a better movie about it. But the idea that it's just, these 5, 4 white girls and 1 Asian chick in the bathroom, the lead into that is like, who would be stupid enough to summon Candyman or to do that? And like, you cut to, the white privileged, suburban high school kids, girls in the John. And then you've got the black girl who comes in and sits in the toilet. She's distraught. I feel like there was a scene that was cut out or something, right? Because she's upset. The girls seem to know she's upset, but not in kind of a bullying way where they caused her to be upset, but like as if they know, like, oh, she's just having a tantrum again, or she's bothered. That's just her. But I'm like, no, I want to know what's going on here.
It's not even clear if they really know her,
Well, I think they do. They call her name a couple of times, but it's like there's a whole contextual thing that's missing. So all that we're left is, it's the black girl who's isolated from the white kids, and she's going to survive. So again, they're almost, in trying to call attention to a very human situation, they're dehumanizing everybody in the scene. And here's a nitpick.
Really?
Yes. Yeah. Here's I know. Surprise. Here's a nitpick. One of the girls looks down on the floor underneath the stalls, and she sees over by the sinks, because 2 of the other girls have gone around the corner of the stalls to the sink and they haven't come back. We hear the hook going into the body and ripping, and we hear stuff like bubbling up and gurgling.
Just see all this.
But we're looking at the floor and nothing's coming down. Like eventually we see the stuff like the blood running down and splattering, but there's a good 20 seconds of like this ripping and splurting. I'm like, what is this? Is the blood levitating? It's
initially a clean rip, and it just splayed out into the the sink first.
Sure.
Yeah.
This movie is, I'm glad I watched it, because it was interesting to see how you can take this concept into the future and botch it completely. But I would like to see a better version of this movie, tackling the issues that it purports to raise in a smarter fashion. Because I think just by bringing things up and putting a bunch of sloganeering type images in a movie doesn't mean that it's actually about anything. It just means you got the iconography right.
And it's almost like too late to have gentrification as the topic in 2019, which is when it was filmed. Because, I mean, the original movie was released in what, 92?
92, yeah.
And so that's when gentrification was really starting to happen in those neighborhoods. And, you know, I mean,
well, I think the issue, I think, is that this is the aftershocks of that. Right. And it's still a conversation that's happening, you know, today in the midst of a lot of the stuff we saw last year in terms of, you know, society and the, you know, the different kind of strata and people wanting to be heard and generational problems stemming from that and even further back. I understand that. But one of the other issues is Cabrini Green back in the 90s was, you know, and I don't have any context for how it was back in the 70s. So it might have been in between 77 and 92, that 15 or 17 years, things had really changed. But in 92, we got a sense of this is the ghetto. This is like a dangerous place.
Gangbangers.
Yeah, gangbangers. It is the kind of place where tragedy happens. And it's interesting that you've got this, you know, kind of a ghostly serial killer manifesting in this, you know, hellhole. But what we see of Cabrini Green in 77 is it just looks like a neighborhood. You know, there's no sense of, yeah, it doesn't look like a wealthy neighborhood, but right. The most you see is like people hanging around outside. You don't see people getting mugged or shot or stabbed. You see cops sitting in a squad car, just like hanging out. It turns out they're hanging out because someone, I guess, in the area that the little girl was, you know, the whole candy razor thing or whatever, and they thought the suspect was about. But there's a disconnect. Like, what is the, I guess if I could understand the police brutality, the bad cop angle more in a 92 setting than I could in the 77 version we see here, which seems tranquil but not the best, you know, the most, you know, wealthy neighborhood. Or you get the 2019 version of Cabrini Green, which is like, you know, high rises and, you know, well-to-do people. That middle connective tissue is not there, and it raises some questions about what they're doing thematically.
Yeah, and you know, in the original movie, I at least from what I've seen, it just seems like the police in that movie, you are actually spending some time with some of the detectives. You know, you're actually, you know, in the precinct. I mean, they're talking about what's happening in the neighborhood and you know what's going on. Here you get like talking heads on the television, you know, some news bits, and it's more about like how these killings are initially related to like this art gallery, and then, you know, it's more about these murders happening and less about like what the police are doing to investigate it. So that's why it seems so weird at the end, like you mentioned, that, you know, all 6 or 8 of these white cops show up at night in the projects and in actually these abandoned places. So I don't know who was calling, who they got a call from, because those are abandoned.
Well, they got a call from William. Because
okay.
As you might have missed it because it was part of that horrible like church scene where it's like,
oh, he did make a phone call. That's right.
Yeah, and I think I think that's how the scene opened, because I think Brianna might have been coming to or something.
That's right. Yeah, I remember that now.
It's off screen. So yeah, he made the phone call. The most interesting scene, I think, to me was when we meet Vanessa Williams as Anne Marie McCoy, who's Anthony's mother. He goes to visit her late in the film to kind of talk about like his origin story. And I love the bit where he starts to say the word Candyman and she shushes him like, you know, some real Voldemort shit.
Yeah, we don't say that.
Right. But you get this genuine sense of like, you know, that's buried. That's verboten in this house. I thought that was neat. And I could see the really good version of this movie peeking its head out in these different corners, but it just got lost in this convoluted mess.
Yeah, it would have been nice to see more of her in the at the end of the movie or something, or just involve her a little bit more, because I mean that's his mom, and I mean, because she knew about Candyman and then the lore and the myth. I mean, for so long it seemed like she wanted to hide him from that, and then you would think that she would be somewhat intuitive to realize that something was happening with him, something was changing him. And it didn't seem like they were there. It seemed like they were kind of estranged anyway, and they weren't that close. So maybe not, but I think she would pick up, it seemed like she would pick up on some of this stuff and maybe try and help him out at the end or something. But the whole thing about the church thing just seemed really odd, just because all of a sudden, Anthony just seems like drugged or something, or in a trance or something, and it's like, how did this happen? What is going on? I don't know.
Well, also it brings up questions going back to the mother, if part of this whole connection is Candyman was grooming Anthony to become his vessel, why did it manifest when he's like a 30-year-old artist? Were there any clues in his life, leading up to this, that he was, kind of touched by anything kind of otherworldly? Because if that's the case, I would think that mom would be on him like a hawk, like she would be living with him and Brianna in that loft, keeping an eye on him. There's just so many unanswered questions, and not unanswered questions like, oh, we're going to explore this in a future movie, or it's so deep you got to think about it. It's more like unanswered questions of like, we kind of watched the first movie, but we've got some things to say, so here's a horror film with commentary.
Yeah, we watched the first movie and we wanted to change a few things.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I still, I liked most of it. I just, as far as like where it went in the second half, I just feel like it all of a sudden went like so fast into so many different places, and it wasn't really earned. I was like, wait, what? But I mean, again, I like Tiana Paris as an actor, and I even like the guy who played her brother, Nathan Stewart Jari. Yeah, I like these actors. I like it's just where their characters go just seemed, like we needed something more. I mean, you mentioned like missed scenes or outtakes. I'm like, is there an unrated, or not unrated, but is there is this a theatrical cut and there's maybe an extended cut or something that we're missing? I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, it's an hour and a half long movie, and some of this feels like it was padded, like the whole thing where Brianna goes to meet with this more prestigious art gallery owner who can give her these great connections to a different show. I'm like, all right, what does this have to do with anything? I would much rather see the the origin story of that high school girl in the bathroom stall than anything having to do with Brianna. Maybe it's because they felt that she's too peripheral a character to just be like the girlfriend of the protagonist as he transforms.
Right.
But just by giving her things to do, that doesn't mean they're actually giving her a character.
Yeah. And I know that this movie, like the first one it got good reviews initially, and which was a surprise to a lot of people. I remember Ebert liked it, but it became more of a cult classic later on. But I know that a lot of people were looking forward to this movie, just because it's an update to Candyman. Where are they going to take this? It's going to be really interesting, and yeah, I don't know. I don't know how well it's going to be received. I have a feeling that it's going to get a little overpraised.
Maybe. I mean, I don't remember if it's Vulture. I'll link to it, in the show description. But Robert Daniels wrote an interesting review of it, a really nice long piece, and he was not crazy about this. I've seen some reaction from, and I know because the immediate reaction of people watching the video, this review, is this is two, white guys talking about Candyman. I've already seen that on Twitter. I've
Yeah.
seen the self-loathing white guys on Twitter saying the only, I don't want to see any white critics talking about Candyman. I'm like, dude, you're white. I'm allowed to have an opinion on a movie. It's okay.
Yeah.
But the thing is, like, I have seen some, not backlash, but just, kind of like, yeah, let's just pull the brakes on this Candyman hype because it's produced by Jordan Peele, unfortunately. And I say that because for the last 2 years, this has been referred to as Jordan Peele's Candyman. It's not. He produced it, he co-wrote it, but it's Nia DaCosta's movie.
Yeah.
I think it might have been possibly, better directed if Jordan Peele had done it, but I think he's got this reputation from Get Out, from Us, and now from putting this out, that he is the social commentary horror guy. And I feel like that's sort of painting him into a corner with this movie in particular. It's like the message is coming first and the quality of the horror comes second, because for anyone who's seen horror movies, this doesn't even approach being scary, and very little in terms of invention.
Yeah, I mean, there are some thrills here, and there's some very interesting scenes, but as far as like flat out scary, I mean, I didn't even really notice a whole lot of jump scares. Like, I wasn't really afraid for any of the characters. In the original movie, I was afraid for Virginia Madsen's character when she was just crawling through those holes in the walls and just, capturing, taking snapshots of what she was seeing. It's like, not because of Candyman, but it's like, okay, rats, whatever, it's just like anything could be in a dilapidated building. She could fall into a floorboard. I'm like, I'm frightened for you.
But the visual, I'm talking about, invention. That scene where she's crawling through the walls, of this tenement, and she comes out the other side, and the camera pulls out, and you realize she's crawling through a hole, the mouth of, the screaming Tony Todd. That is, really kind of unsettling. Also, when Candyman first seduces her, I think it's in the parking lot.
Yeah.
He makes himself known. He hypnotizes her, almost like with the Dracula stare.
Like the tear coming down.
The tear coming down. She's kind of like, whispering to herself, and then everything gets all wibbly with the bees and everything. I think that's when she wakes up, elsewhere,
in that apartment,
in the apartment where she's just killed the dog or whatever it was that happened. That's some really twisted stuff, and nothing in this film comes close to approaching that.
No. And I think if you're going to look at social commentary, I mean, that movie had a little bit more social commentary, because if you remember all the cops that barge into Anne Marie's apartment in that scene, there's a bit of a struggle that, she just had with Helen, and Helen's holding up like a butcher knife, or, and that's when, on top of a white woman with a butcher knife on top of a black woman, and nobody opens fire. If the roles were reversed, I mean, they would gun down the black woman, easily. But because it's a white woman, and, the project's, even though she has blood all over herself, she's holding a machete. It's like, no, we're going to hold her down and grab her. We're not going to come in guns blazing like they do in this movie. So maybe they're trying to say something. It is a little too heavy-handed, I think, and it's kind of disappointing. I like some of the character interaction and the conversations they're having, between the couple, Anthony and Bree, and her brother and his boyfriend. I liked all that, but I didn't feel as, say, threatened by Candyman in this movie as I did in the original one. It wasn't this like kind of like looming figure, this shadowy, this possible like presence that could be around the corner. It just seemed like something that was overtaking him, kind of like what you're saying with like Brundlefly, that he was turning into, and we didn't really like, okay, why? And so, but even though Anthony was turning into and being infected by Candyman, Candyman was still out and about and murdering people even while and before that was happening. So it's like, okay, how many Candymen? Why don't they just call this movie Candyman? I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, there's I think a much better handling of this material, honestly, is A Nightmare on Elm Street Part 2, Freddy's Revenge, where Freddy starts taking over this, the high school boy's body, and it does have that situation where you're always wondering, is Freddy Krueger killing these, people, or is it this kid who's kind of become obsessed with the legend? But yeah, that's the convolution of the Candymen, as you pointed, is a great thing to clue in on, because the first time we see Candyman is that old guy with the hook in his hand. And my first thought is, wait, is this really going to be the new Candyman? This is really lame looking, but it's not. It's sort of a misdirect, but it's also sort of not, because there's 3 Candymen and there's possibly more that we just haven't seen yet. I'm like, I don't know who I'm supposed to be threatened by or afraid of or feel sympathy for, because the old guy with the hook turned out he was probably innocent, so he's a good guy, but he's looks like a bad guy, which sounds like some kind of a lesson about, can't judge a book by its cover. But I'm like, just focus on one thing, tell that story really well, and I'll be impressed. But I think that's probably a pretty good place to end it. I didn't hate this movie. I was just really annoyed by it, because I think it could have been so much more.
Yeah, it's tough when you see the potential. Again, I don't know. To me, I would kind of watch it again just to see like the way certain things were filmed, and just maybe try and give it a chance to understand it a little bit more. But I don't know if I'll be doing that anytime soon. It'll be interesting. Again, it'll be interesting to see what the response is, and if another movie is greenlit. I don't know.
I'd much rather see, if this movie does any kind of, business, I would like to see Nia DaCosta given some money to do something original, and Jordan Peele.
Like a Marvel movie, which she's doing.
What is she attached to?
She's been directing the new Marvel movie, the Marvels.
Oh, yeah, I think I'd heard about that.
Captain Marvel 2, basically, and it's got Miss Marvel, I think it's Pakistani character, and of course Carol Danvers, but also Monica Rambeau, Tiana Paris.
Okay,
so that's why it's called The Marvels.
Yeah, well, thanks for draining all enthusiasm out of me with that revelation.
Well, it's not too much of a letdown, because you didn't like the first Captain Marvel, so there you go.
No. No, but I mean, but just the idea, as much as I didn't like Get Out, I really responded to Us.
Yeah.
So in terms of Jordan Peele, again, if this movie does anything, I would like to see that the profits reinvested back into Monkey Paw to, let's get away from, franchises, even though they're 30 years old, and just do something, I want more original horror. I want to see that.
Yeah, it would be interesting to see him branch out. I never saw any of his Twilight Zone produced episodes, but I would love for him to be able to take, like, I don't necessarily need to see him do different genres, because there's enough subgenres in the horror genre to kind of play around with. But it would be nice to actually, if you looked at all his movies, Get Out, Us, it almost feels like you could go into, like, you could also see him maybe approaching his different projects as, all right, it's almost like a Twilight Zone for feature films. What would happen in this situation, or in this, so I'm still very interested to see what he does as far as the movies he directs. I don't know, this never really felt like a Jordan Peele joint, if you will, even though his name's, he's here as a co-writer, as a producer. I don't know.
Yeah, I feel like they're really hyping that up,
Probably,
possibly because they understand that the movie it's just a horror movie. It's not going to set the world on fire the way that Get Out did. But
right.
Who knows? This could be the next Get Out, and I have just no idea. But yeah, anyway, I'm going to get out. I'm going to let you go, and I appreciate you spending the entire evening with me. For those out there who did not join us for the live stream, we just did talk about What If episode 3, so you can check that out on the Kicking the Seat YouTube channel. But David Fowley, thank you again.
Thank you. I'm gonna go look in the mirror and say my name 5 times.
Wait. Oh, real quick.
Maybe I'll say your name 5 times. And wait.
Please don't say my name in any context when you're alone. Anyway, but real quick, I want to ask you, because this is something that I don't think I got out of the first movie. I understand the Candyman origin, but did they ever explain why the saying the name 5 times in the mirror, how that was connected to the legend?
In this movie?
Or in the original?
No. I mean, why 5 times and not 7? Why not just 3? I don't know. I don't know.
I understand, because it's based on like the Bloody Mary, Bloody Mary. You say that 3 or 5 times in the mirror, and it's supposed to show up and kill you. I get that. I just don't know if they ever tied it directly to the origin of what happened to Tony Todd's character back in the 1890s.
No, not that I know of.
Okay, well, we'll find out in Candyman 5, I'm sure. But yeah. All right. Have a good night, sir. Thank you.
All right. Thanks.
Bye.